And thank you for joining us for Conversations with Ted. I'm Debbie Ausburn, a partner at Taylor English Duma. I've spent more than 30 years as a social worker. Then I went to law school and worked as a criminal prosecutor, and now a civil trial attorney defending youth organizations. Along the way, I served as a foster parent, and I'm the author of a book, Raising Other People's Children: What Foster Parenting Taught Me About Bringing Together a Blended Family.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Rawlings. It's my pleasure to be working with Debbie and to be with y'all today. As for me, I've also been a practicing lawyer for about 30 years. I've spent a lot of that time doing other things, such as a juvenile court judge. I was the child advocate for the state of Georgia, and most recently, I was a director of Georgia's Division of Family and Children's Services. My book, which is not as interesting as Debbie's, is on Georgia's juvenile court, child abuse and juvenile justice policy procedures and law. But again, we're here today to talk with you a little bit about what to do when, before, and during, and after a crisis in 3 different segments. Debbie, you want to introduce that a little bit?
Yes, we're doing a 3-part series for youth serving organizations on what you do whenever you have a complaint come in. Either a current client says that someone in the program has abused them, or, as is becoming more common, you have someone who comes in and says, when I was in your program 20 years ago, so-and-so did such and such, and what are you going to do about it? So we're talking, this first series is, this first program in the series is talking about the first step, which is what you can do now before the claim comes in to start preparing for having to do this internal investigation that you're discussing. And the first step I always tell my clients is go start looking for and pulling out every insurance policy that you have ever had as an organization. If it's a relatively young organization, that'll be a little easier. But if you are a long-established organization, you need to go back in the archives as far as you can and get every policy. The reason for that is it's become quite a trend and quite a fad for legislatures to change the statute of limitations for certain kinds of charges. And now in some states, you can be sued up to 30 years after someone was in your program if they're claiming that they were sexually abused in the program. So in order to prepare for those claims, you need to know what insurance company you need to notify and who you need to pull in to start helping you bear the cost of handling these claims and defending them.
Yeah, and Debbie, I just simply add that, a lot of folks they need to understand that different types of insurance, there's claims made policies, there are policies that cover a time period. And the other thing you should always do is make sure that your entire history of your organization, at least going back 30 years, as you said, is covered for these types of claims, and that you can easily access them so that if something does come up, you can immediately notify that insurer.
Well, the second thing that I always recommend that my clients do is pull together the team that's going to be handling this. So you can sit down and do a tabletop exercise with your administrative staff and say who is going to be doing what if you have a claim come in. So you need, for example, the executive manager, which is the person who coordinates everything. They may not actually do the interviews or do the interfacing with all of the different people, but they're the ones who are responsible for keeping all of the balls in the air. And so that often is the CEO, but it depends on how large the organization is, because some CEOs are already full up with their schedules. So it might be a risk manager or someone else in administration who can keep their fingers in all of the different pies that are involved in this. The next thing person that you might want to pull in will be an attorney to help advise you. That can be either someone within the organization, if the organization's large enough to have a general counsel, or it can be someone from outside the organization. And that's someone who is looking at the events and the claim with the idea of future litigation involved. Now, Tom, if you want to talk a little bit about the role of attorneys in that, and how sometimes we take on too big a role.
Certainly. And I think that's the important part, is to understand that the attorney in this situation has a vital but a limited role. So, for example, Debbie, we often go in to organizations and do sort of audits of their procedures, of their processes, to make sure that they're doing things well. But we also know that attorneys tend to be very reactive and not proactive. They tend to want to control information rather than be transparent. And Debbie, I think, in terms of step 3 kind of goes with step 2. Not only do you need to define the roles of each person in your organization as to how they will respond, but you really need to put together protocols. And I know you and I have frequently been called upon to put together checklists, for example, to really prepare organizations for, if this happened to you, how do you respond, who responds, what is the time frame for responding? Because if you don't have those protocols in place, if you don't have those policies in place, then the minute someone calls and says this happened, then unfortunately we're all emotional. We hate when abuse occurs, and we tend to react rather than to act proactively. Debbie, what do you got any particular protocols or policies that people need to have in place on that?
Well, there are a couple. One, and it also falls back with make sure you have some people on your team to handle, for example, media communications. So you need a protocol telling employees that they don't need to be talking to the news media. They don't need to be pushing anything out on social media. They don't need to be making any public comments about any of these claims or anything that has gone on. All of those communications need to go through the public relations contact. Now, again, if you're a large enough organization, then you probably have a person on board, or at least an outside person on retainer. If you are not a large enough organization to have needed a public relations contact, now is the time to get them on board, help them understand your program and your organization, and get them to start a template for you of what to say and what public statements to make. Of course, you'll have to leave a lot of blanks because you don't have a situation right now and you don't know the exact details. But the farther ahead you can think with this public relations and developing a protocol to give to your employees, again, that you are that much farther ahead if something comes down the pike.
It's all about preparation. I mean, nobody wants these things to occur, but unfortunately, bad things do occur. And the more that you can be prepared to face those crises, both in terms of in legal terms, but also in terms of communication, transparency, assisting the victim, addressing the media, then that's, you'll be much better off. Any last thoughts, Debbie? I think we're about out of time on this one.
Well, I would say you mentioned the talking to the victim. I just leave with the thought that you do need someone whose job is to interface with the victim, particularly if they don't have a lawyer yet, because again, your obligation is to take care of clients who were at the program, and you have to resist the temptation. We as lawyers will nudge you into the direction of thinking of these claimed victims, potential victims, as potential opponents in a lawsuit. And that is antithetical to what we as youth serving organizations need to do. We need to have someone and need to have a plan for dealing with them respectfully and honestly and with transparency.
Well, thank you for watching this episode of Conversations with Ted. We hope you'll keep watching, especially our next episode, as we really talk about how to handle internal investigations into cases of abuse or mistreatment. So come back, stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.